Hello dear students, welcome to biology classes. In today's session, we are going to study about the heredity and evolution. So shall we get into the topic? So what is heredity is, as you all know, every organism on earth, it produces the offsprings. What are offsprings are? The offsprings are the new individuals. The new individuals are produced either by the sexual reproduction or by the asexual reproduction. So that is the most important aspect of every living organism. So when you take the asexual reproduction of all the offsprings, they resemble just as each other, because here only a single parent is involved in this process. And of course, we can find only a small differences, a very small variation or a very small difference is noted in this process, which just arises. But in most of the animals, including the human beings, the reproduction takes place in asexual method. In sexual method. It takes place in sexual method. That is, the offsprings they do look, and sometimes they don't resemble. They do look like their parents, but they are not exactly the same, or some copies are not identical. Some copies of the individuals, they are not identical. And also, they do not exactly resemble each other in other ways. This is the process of reproduction. That is asexual and sexual reproduction. Of course, sexual reproduction is normally seen in animals and in human beings. And of course, a lot of variation is seen, because it is the union of one sperm and one egg. So the coordination takes place here. The fusion of the gametes, especially the ovum and the egg and the sperm. So of course there will be some variation noted, and they will not, sometimes they may be alike, and sometimes they may be alike, but in certain cases they may not be alike, and they will have some variations. And of course, the next aspect of our chapter will be the evolution. What is evolution is? Evolution is nothing but it is the origin of life. How was the origin of life before our ancestors, before our period, before the ancestors? How the earth was? What are the different changes, the mutational process, the development which took place rapidly right now? So to study about the earth and the origin of life on earth in the ancestral period is the evolutional study. And of course, the origin of life, that is around, I can just tell you, it is like 3 to 6 billion years ago. It is believed that it should be originated from many chemical reactions. They say that earth itself is created by some powers, some chemical processes, and that is how earth was formed. They are saying some terrestrial body, like a star or any type of a star, when it reaches the earth, it falls, that dust arose into the earth. There many stories are behind this evolution. It is believed, it is not the conceptual learning, but it is believed that the earth would have originated due to some chemical reaction on the primitive earth. And of course, the living forms would have gradually developed through some continuous variation right from the microorganisms. an enormous diversity. It should have given an enormous diversity right from the microorganisms. It starts like from the algae, the fungi, the plants, animals, and the entire species of the human beings, all this on earth. And this branch of biology normally deals with the changes which takes place in the diversity of the living organisms, where when over a period of time, and this is called as the evolution. So in this session, today's session, we will be concentrating about what is a gene, what is a hereditary is, what is a variation is, and some experiments which was carried out by a famous scientist, Mendel's work of inheritance. How did he contrast, how did he connect the pairs, and what was the generation which was brought as a result. So these are all the topics which we are going to deal about in today's session. The next part will be the hereditary. So as you can see, the heredity is nothing but it's a transmission of the characters. The transmission of the characters right from the parents to the offsprings. And that is from one generation. The gene, the genetic material or the hereditary material is carried from one generation to the next generation, and that is called as the hereditary. Of course, this hereditary involves some makeup of a body, or some design of a body, or some similarities which is seen in the body, as well as the variation which is brought forth from one generation to another. That is, which is brought forth from one generation to another. That is, right from the parents to the offsprings. So when you talk about the individuals of this generation, what do? They reproduce. Once they reproduce, the offsprings in maybe the next generation, maybe their children, the second generation, they will also have a particular similarities, a particular makeup of gene from the earlier parents. That is, the differences that they inherit right from their foreparents, that is, right from the first generation, as well as the newly developed differences from their own parents. So when you can see the picture right here, the grandfather, the father, and the kid. When you take the grandfather, of course, he has the blue eyes there. The eyes are very evident over there, and he has the blue eyes. But that is the first generation. When you take the second generation, his generation, his father, the person or the man, he did not get the similarity. He did not get inherited the eyes, especially the color was not inherited. The eyes were normal. It is in black color. Just you can see in the figure there, it's very normal, and he has not inherited the eyes, especially the blue colored eyes. And also some features are also hidden, you can see. But the next generation, that is the grandfather to father, the father to the child. When you see the third generation, it's very amazing and interesting that is progeny, or the father's child, that is the child has inherited the blue eyes from the forefathers, that is from his grandfather. He has inherited the blue eyes, but the father, he did not get that inherited color, but it was transformed from one generation to another. That sequence is called as the heritage. Of course, the next part of our hereditary lesson will be the variation. What is this variation is? As you can see in the figure there, all of the picture defines the human being. If you can see the picture there, all the faces is related to a human's face. But one is not the same as the other. Did you notice that? One is not the same. So, that similarity is called as a variation. The differences which is seen by an individual from a species, even then they are human beings, even then they have the same blood and the color, the face, the bones, the hair, everything is same, but the features is different. That is, the outermost feature is totally different, and it varies in similarities. One is very beautiful, one is very color, the one person is very dark. So that similarity or that differences which is seen by an individual of a species or from an offspring, and that is referred to as the variation. That is, they don't exactly resemble their parents. They have the variation. The variation can easily be seen from one individual to another. So here comes the new term called genetics. What is this genetics is? To study about the gene, okay, which gene made this possible. So we all saw the picture is not as same as one, right? So that is because of the gene, the patterns of gene, especially the DNA, the deoxyribonucleic acids, the position, one will not be as the same. So this study of the hereditary, that is the information which is carried on from one generation to another, and the variation and the similarities, all this is called as the genetics. And of course, during this process of reproduction, there is always variation taking place. There is always a variation takes place. Of course, it is very, very necessary and mandatory for the evolution of the organisms. It can also be changed in the characters. What is characters otherwise called as? The characters are otherwise called as the traits. When you talk about the characters, what are the characters are? The characters are nothing but the color of the hair. Just like you can see in the figure there, one hair color is not the same, or one eye color is not the same as other, which the offspring exhibits. Of course, this variation is responsible for many structural and functional changes, or in other terms I can say it is in many ways helpful, and many ways it gives a drastic change in morphological features and also in physiological features. What are physiological features are? The physique of a person. The physique of a person is called as physiological features. Not only the structure, not only the size, the shape, and the formation, but also the physique of a person will keep on varying from one organism to another, and all these are the basic processes which involves in evolution as well. Okay, so this variation also helps in adapting to any type of environment. That is, the individuals get acclimatized, or he gets acclimatized, he gets involved, or he gets adapted to the new surroundings. If it is a cold weather, he is getting adapted himself. If it is very, very rainy weather, and it's very freezing with minus, even then he is able to adapt because of the genetic, because of this variation. And this acclimatization condition only makes the person to live on the earth. So it makes the possibility of a person to live, the existence of the earth, person on the earth is made simple as ever. For example, I told you, it can be the climatic change. The climatic change can force any type of an organism to shift or to shift its particular position or the range from the higher points to the lower end, from the lower end to the higher points. It can be vice versa, anything. So only those who accept all this change will make the survival of the fittest. Only the person who lives for all this, he will be the person, he or she will be the survival of the fittest. Supposing if the variation occurs in the individuals, then it will be very, very difficult for the individual to survive in normal conditions. So this is about how the variation takes place in human beings. So now let's go into the next subtopic, which is the variation especially seen during the process of reproduction. What happens here? So as you can see, the picture itself shows a continuous variation. If you take right from the beak of a bird, even then it is a bird which has a beak, but the features are not the same. There is a lot of quite of variation seen in the bird itself. So when you take the second picture, the human trait, the human variation, there you can see a mass differentiation, especially in height, in color, in the intelligence, in height, in weight. Everything is a variation seen. Of course, the next picture you can see the beautiful puppies there, the dog, the puppies, everything. There itself you can see many species, right? Many variation in the species you can see. One is not the same. So these are the best examples of variation, especially which takes place during the process of reproduction. So when an organism reproduces, all of us know the organisms reproduce. Of course, the new individuals, or I can say the new offsprings, they show a very less similarities or very less differentiation or variation due to the inheritance of the DNA, due to the inheritance of the DNA, or the, I can tell you, or the copying of the DNA. In other terms, I can say in the copying of the DNA. So these variations are normally they are they are seen very minimal in the case of asexual reproduction, because since it involves only a parent, a single parent is involved. As I told, don't forget this concept. In asexual reproduction, only single parent is involved. There is no sperms, there is no eggs in asexual reproduction, but only in sexual reproduction you will find the egg and the sperm is involved in the process, and that is why we can experience the variation. So don't forget this concept. So the variation are very less in the case of asexual reproduction, but the variation are seen more in sexual reproduction, and some variation are useful as they make the organism to acclimatize, or they make the organism to adjust to the present surroundings. And of course, these variation, they do not help the organism to adjust. Sometimes they don't help the organism to adjust in the environment, as some organisms may die, some they will not adapt, right, and they will die. For example, the sparrows, I can say the best examples are the sparrows. So if you take maybe 15 to 20 or 30 years before, the sparrows are the best visitors in every residence, right? Every house will have a nest of a sparrow. But now, what is the case? We cannot see the sparrow. We hardly see it. We hardly see. If you go into the internal part or the interior part of the village, maybe you can see. Do you know the reason why? I'll tell you. That is because of the radiations. They say that the scientific studies says, now we are into the technology, the latest advancement, and we are into the latest technology, right? So once we are into the latest technology, we are acclimatizing ourselves, or we are adjusting to the recent advances and techniques in any field of life science, in any time of research or anything. But the animals or the birds, they don't. Especially once the 4G arrived, the highest frequency, the highest range of waves, these birds did not survive. They cannot survive. Some died and some started to move to a region where they can adapt there. That is, where they can really avoid all these harsh environments. So that is the region where they can avoid the harsh environment and where they can adapt themselves. So that is the main focus. So here some organisms, they survive. Some organisms, what happens? They die and they become extinct. So reproduction is very essential for every living organism to make life on earth very easy and to produce the offsprings of the same kind. Of course, these offsprings also are produced during the reproduction process, and the offsprings they are also not identical to each other. But the variation alone, you can say it varies from one type of reproduction to another. And of course, there are two different modes of reproduction. One is the sexual reproduction, where the two parents of the opposite sex are involved, and the opposite sex are involved. And another is the sexual reproduction. It is only the single parent which helps to produce the new offspring. Okay, how this variation occurs in offsprings. So variation is normally very common, and it varies from type of from asexual to sexual. So let's first see the variation in sexual reproduction. So in case of the asexual reproduction, the transfer of the genetic materials is only done from a single parent. Don't forget that the transformation of the genetic material takes place only from a single parent. Due to this reason and due to this fact, or due to this concept, variation is seen. Not too much of the variation is seen in the type of these offspring, and only little changes can be seen because of the DNA copying, or the inaccuracy of the DNA copying mechanism. So I can tell you the examples. I can give you some fruits. If you take the fruit itself, maybe an apple. If you take an apple, of course there is also variation in apple, just like how the birds and man and dogs and puppies vary. Even in fruits and vegetables you can see the variation. I can tell you in fruits, the apples, the bananas, they does not take the same similarities. They never look just the same. They keep on changing. That is, they have the variety like the green plantain, the yellow plantain, the mountain plantain, the country, and we have lot of names and varieties. So when you take a vegetable, when you take a capsicum itself, the capsicum itself can grow in many colors. The onions, if you see, you have the small bulbs, you have the bigger ones, and much more to say, the recent advances, the one big, the eggplant, I can say, the brinjals. So all this shows a variation, but the variation in sexual reproduction is involved. Since it involves the two parents, of course, the individuals also, they differ. And also, not only that, the genetic makeup, there is a differentiation in the genetic makeup itself, and causes number of variation in the newly produced individuals, or I can tell you in the newly produced offsprings. And due to this factor, this offspring, they look totally different from their parents. So this variation, what does it tells us? The variation which is accumulated in any type of an offspring, it passes from one generation to another, and thus this variation is evidently noticed, or this is clearly noticed. It's evidently noticed, taking place normally right from one generation to another. So that is the main concept in this variation. And the best example I can tell you, the human beings. Of course, what do you achieve by this? What is the best? What is the variation or the importance? So since variation is a very complex process by which it is easy to determine the similarities and the dissimilarities of an organism.